All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here today. I'm really grateful that you've joined our Washington Women's Foundation Learning Community for today's session on gender, how we understand it, how it shapes our world, and how we can thoughtfully apply that understanding to our work together. Our, our desire to articulate our current thinking about gender grows directly out of our renewed focus on women and girls in Washington, especially those who are the farthest from justice. As many of you know, this focus didn't appear overnight. It took almost 2 years of deep strategic planning and thinking through focus groups, member forums, surveys, countless conversations intended to help us understand the heart of Washington Women's Foundation. And what we heard again and again was this: our members love women. You love being in community with other women. You love learning with other women. You love working alongside women to drive meaningful change. That sense of shared identity as women and shared purpose is something that's really powerful and something that we are really excited to embrace and uplift and dive into more deeply. During this process, as we came to this new direction, we also asked ourselves a really important question, which was if we held ourselves to the same criteria that we ask of our grantee partners, would we be showing up differently in the world? And the answer became increasingly clear that if we were an organization of women and by women, then perhaps it was time for us to be explicitly for women as well. So we have leaned into and embraced our lived experience as women, expanding on how we could and did use that experience as a source of leadership and connection. And then we thought, what if Washington Women's Foundation could help weave together women and girl-centered organizations across the state with the women who wanted to support them, building a network rooted in rights and access, freedom, and yes, womanhood. The idea ultimately shaped our new organizational vision of who and what we are as a foundation. We are an intentional community of women of all backgrounds, united in building a just, equitable, and thriving Washington. And we are on a mission to provide a long-term unrestricted capital, organizational support, and networking to social change efforts supporting women and girls in Washington state. Together, we believe we can leverage the power of our collective to break down systemic barriers, to advance women's leadership, and to meet essential needs so that every woman and girl in Washington can thrive. So once the board had approved that direction, the staff and I began thinking about what it would take to bring these commitments to life. And we realized something really important. To do this well, we all need a shared vocabulary, a shared understanding around concepts like women, girls, gender, intersectionality, and how these ideas lace through our equity work. As a foundation, we've spent years strengthening our understanding of racial and gender inequities and how they operate in our society. And now we're deepening and expanding that work by looking even more closely at how gender shapes and shows up in our lives and in the world around us, sometimes similarly, sometimes differently, across communities and identities. Today is both a learning opportunity and a level-setting moment as we begin our Women and Girls grant making together. I'll be learning right alongside you, and I'm genuinely looking forward to the conversation and the insights that will come from our time together. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kiana Scott to the floor to tell you a little about herself and kick off our first collective learning session on gender for the year. Thanks, everybody. Doctor?
Well, thank you so much, Maria. And I'm going to go ahead and share screens. It's just such a joy to be here. Maria, thank you for the invitation. Catherine and Aviva, it's been so wonderful to work with you on this. And it's great to see so many familiar and new faces and names here. So my name is Kiana Scott. I'm delighted to be here today to speak about gender lens and the state of women and girls in Washington today. But I want to start by introducing myself. So I, like all of us, hold many identities in this world. I have a PhD in political communication. My focus is on gender and American political discourse. That's a very happy photo of me being delighted to graduate and to get a good occasion to wear my fancy regalia that I have never worn since. I am also the outgoing president of the National Women's Political Caucus of Washington. This is a photo of me with some colleagues at the world premiere of the touring production of Suffs at the Fifth Avenue Theater earlier this fall. I am a small business owner. I am a strategy and communication consultant. My business is Kiana Scott Strategies. I am a woman owned business certified by the state. That was an exciting accomplishment in which I learned that unless you pay for all of your filing fees with your own credit card, not a shared credit card if you have a spouse, and unless you go through a significant process, if you open a business, an LLC in Washington state, your spouse, in my case, my husband, might be the co-owner of that business unintentionally. That was a real wake-up call for me in recognizing that, wow, there are many systems that are not set up well and not set up with a gender lens. We'll be talking about that more. I'm also an elected precinct committee officer. This is up here. Running for office is not something I have any intention of doing other than this role. It was a really exciting, valuable experience for me to step up and serve my community in this way. And then I'm also a mom. I have a 3-year-old daughter. Here she is playing on the beach on San Juan Island, where I'm from. That's both core to who I am, informs a lot of how I think about the world, and is right next to me as someone who holds a doctorate, someone who owns a business, someone who does good work for organizations out there in the world, which isn't a really easy thing to communicate verbally. So you have this picture of like my notebook and my computer, because the reality of day-to-day small business ownership is a lot of that and not a lot of glamorous fancy hats. So it's really nice to meet all of you. Our time together today. I've already said hi, shared a little bit about who I am. We're going to focus by getting on the same page. We're going to unpack some key concepts in this work. We'll talk about gender, we'll talk about sex, we'll talk about gender identity, intersectionality, what it means to be gender expansive. We'll also talk about what a gender lens is, and then we'll talk about how we can apply it. We'll go through a couple of examples. We'll then talk a bit about the state of women and girls in Washington today. I will share some resources that I have found really helpful in my own evolving thinking about a lot of this work. There are many, many great things out there in this world. We're lucky in that way. These are just a few of my favorites. I also have works cited so you can see where I'm getting some of the information I'm sharing today. But I want to start by sharing, by grounding us in the approach that I am asking us to take today, which is for us all to be open and curious. Some of us, we're all starting from different places. For some, these may be concepts that we've been learning about, evolving with, grappling with, thinking about for a very long time. For some, these may be concepts that are really new and that we're still unpacking. But we are all learning together. That's really important. We're also all doing our best. We're not going to be perfect. None of us. I make mistakes in this work all the time, always hoping to do better. And recognizing that this is a start, not an end. We have a lot of information to cover today. There is no way I could do justice to the complicated and interesting and rich work of gender in the United States today, right? There's no way we could fully cover the state of women and girls in Washington, much less do both of those things. So this is an invitation to start thinking about some of this, or to continue your thinking. But this is a start, not an end. So, what is gender? And I'm going to talk a lot. Catherine is monitoring the chat. Thank you, Catherine. If folks have clarifying questions, and I'll save time for questions at the end. But because we have so much to cover, I do want to reserve that time. So I'll offer 2 definitions. Gender generally, these are obviously very similar. Gender generally refers to the socially learned behaviors, repeated performance, and idealized expectations that are associated with and distinguish between the prescribed gender roles of masculinity and femininity. A second variation on this. Gender refers to the characteristics of women, men, girls, and boys that are socially constructed. This includes norms, behaviors, and roles associated with being a woman, man, girl, or boy, as well as relationships with each other. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can change over time. The italics in both of these definitions are mine: socially learned and socially constructed. Gender is socially constructed. We're going to now turn to sex. Gender interacts with but is different from sex. which refers to the different biological and physiological characteristics of females, males, and intersex persons, such as chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs. Gender and sex are related to, but distinct from, gender identity. So gender, socially constructed, socially learned. Sex, biological, physiological. Related, but distinct. Gender identity refers to a person's deeply felt internal or individual experience of gender, which may or may not correspond to the person's physiologically or designated sex at birth. So gender, sex, gender identity. Your gender, or excuse me, your gender identity and your sex may align. They may not. For those of us who are cis women, I'm a cis woman. My pronouns are she, her. I am a cis woman. My gender identity and my sex align. That's not true of everyone. We're going to talk more about this in a second. So gender expansive. Gender expansive, and I apologize. I know that I'm just saying a lot of things. We're going to get through that and then we'll have more opportunity for conversation. But I want to make sure we're all using concepts in the same way. So gender expansive is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and or gender expression. So gender identity, how you feel, gender expression, how you express it externally. Gender expansive is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and or gender expression expands beyond, actively resists, I love that phrasing, and or does not conform to the current cultural or social expectations of gender, particularly in relation to male or female. So gender expansive is a much broader term. We have a really lovely visual of what an umbrella term would be. So this is a broad umbrella term, gender expansive, basically saying this is this is an umbrella that encompasses a number of different forms of gender identity. So whether you are non-binary, you fall somewhere in the middle on a gender spectrum, which male, female exists, man, woman exists at either end, man, woman, not male, female, or binary. Trans woman has a binary experience, not a non-binary experience. This deck will also be available for everyone. We can share it afterwards if folks want to be able to refer back to this. So we've talked about gender, we've talked about sex, how those are distinct. We've talked about gender identity, we've talked about gender expansive. Intersectionality is where a lot of this fits together. So I'm going to share, again, two ways of thinking about this that are deeply related, but add to each other. So gender-based discrimination intersects with other factors of discrimination, such as ethnicity, socioeconomic status, disability, age, geographic location, gender identity, and sexual orientation, among others. This is referred to as intersectionality. Folks have likely heard this term before. Intersectionality is a term that was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. That's why her name is highlighted down at the bottom here in 1989. She's a Black feminist scholar. And in 2017, she wrote a piece for the Columbia Law Review in which she reflected on how this term has evolved, how this has emerged, how this has entered sort of our cultural lexicon. She says, and again, the italics are mine, intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. Intersectionality is a lens which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. I love that. It's not simply that there's a race problem here, a gender problem here, and a class or LGBTQ problem here. Many times that framework erases what happens to people who are subject to all of these things. So all of us, this is the idea that all of us hold multiple identities. Every human on this planet holds multiple identities. Those identities do not exist without relation to each other. The way that those relationships and those identities overlap or intersect impacts how the world engages with us, how we engage with the world. And this is what that looks like. Or this is one visual representation of what this looks like. We all have a gender identity. We all have a racial or ethnic identity. We all have a class identity, a nationality, a sexual orientation, differing levels of ability. All of those things piece together and overlap, informing each other, impacting each other, in some cases colliding potentially, that influence how we are seen in the world, how we engage with the world, how we have power in this world. Treating those as discrete, unrelated pieces does us all a tremendous disservice and minimizes the experience, particularly of those furthest from power, particularly those furthest from power across multiple identities. So intersectionality is how all these things come together. So how we think about this at the Washington Women's Foundation. So through grants, Washington Women's Foundation supports women, girls, and gender expansive people, including cis, people whose gender identity aligns with their sex, trans, and non-binary individuals and communities. So some specifics that impact our work, and these are beliefs that Washington Women's Foundation holds. We recognize that gender inequality, so inequality based on people's gender, impacts people with different gender identities, not exclusively people who identify as women. So gender inequality impacts people with a variety of gender identities. When Washington Women's Foundation says women and girls, we include people who identify as trans and or non-binary. So we are not just talking about women and girls based on sex or designated sex at birth. We also believe firmly, just to be really explicit, trans women are women. These are beliefs that we hold. So, bunch of concepts that I just threw at you. Hopefully, it makes sense how these all come together. And here's how we're thinking about applying them through a gender lens. What is a gender lens? And a gender lens is a broad concept. We'll talk about what that is and then a bit about gender lens philanthropy specifically. A gender lens is an analytical approach that assesses the institutionalization of gender differences as a major underpinning of structural inequalities in much of the world. This is actually a definition from Runyon and Peterson wrote a book about gender in the globe. So this is a broad concept. There's a lot of work using gender lenses in certainly in developing nations and lots of other parts of the world. This lens sheds light on the different lived experiences of people based on gender and how masculinity and femininity are embedded within society. Why does it matter? So great, we have a gender lens. We're thinking about gender. Why does this matter? Applying gender lens means that those designing policies, making content, policies to me is really important. I think a lot about how we set up institutions of power, how we create systems, how we could have changed my ability to apply for a business license so that I didn't have to ask my husband to sign a piece of paper giving up all rights to my business. Kiana Scott Strategies, a business in my name. That worked for me. If I was in a coercive or abusive relationship and I was establishing a small business to gain some financial security for myself, I would not be in a position to ask a partner to sign that paper. I would not be owner of a small business, right? These decisions matter. So designing policy, making content, or making decisions, do so with attention to potential gender imbalances or biases in what is being proposed. Using a gender lens reveals the way in which content, policies, tradition, some of those unspoken rituals that we don't even think to question, institutions and approaches are gendered, accessible to, shaped by, biased towards, or limited by gender-based perspectives or experiences. So in other words, gender is all around us. There's nothing we can do to change that. It just is, right? A gender lens makes the invisible visible. We use a gender lens to explore what's already there, but to identify it, to specify it, to name it, and then be able to solve for it. And how we make this visible. We talk about it. We say, oh, it's kind of weird that the school always calls mom first. Why don't they call dad? We think about it. My husband and I set up a family email account for our preschool. They do not have my personal email. They do not have my husband's personal email. That way we both have the ability to check it. I don't have to, I would probably get things sent to me as mom. They're sent to both of us. We're both responsible for it. So we had to think about that. We're aware, we here today, those of us who care about this work, can be aware of how gender and gender dynamics impact the world and impact us. And we do this wearing a number of hats, right? Because we all wear a lot of hats. We have a lot of different identities. We're consumers. We have choices about where our dollars go. We have the ability to vote with our dollars. We also get to choose what kind of cultural artifacts we're engaging with. Do we read books written only by men, hopefully not. But we get to think about how we're consuming things in this world. As community members, who am I spending time with? Who am I supporting? How am I engaging with my community? How am I recognizing who else is engaging and who's doing that work? Who's doing that visible work? Who's doing that invisible work to really create community? As voters, who am I voting for? Doesn't just mean voting for women, right? But it means saying, are the people that I'm voting for engaging with questions of gender? Are they aware of this? Are they saying, oh, family policies don't really need to talk about that? Or are they thinking about childcare, about elder care? Are men talking about these things? We can think about this as family members, right? We can think about this within our own relationships. We can think about this with family dynamics. We can think how we demonstrate and what we demonstrate to our children if we have them. We can think about this as funders. That's what we're here to do today. But there are some obstacles. It's not enough to just say, hey, let's bring a gender lens to this work. We have to be thoughtful about it, right? Potential obstacles to successfully implementing a gender lens approach could include the misconception, this is a misconception, that existing norms and institutions are gender neutral. Nothing is gender neutral in this world. It is not an accident that the Constitution was written by white men, right? That has implications for our country today. Another obstacle, the assumption that tradition or status quo must be prioritized over equity or inclusion. It might be more comfortable to prioritize tradition or status quo. It might be uncomfortable to prioritize equity or inclusion. But assuming that tradition or status quo must be prioritized over the lack of comfort it may take to advance equity or inclusion, we've got to do it. There's a lack of enforcement mechanisms. There isn't a group out there saying, or certainly not in Trump's America, saying we need to be thinking about gender and about fairness and about equality and equity. And then a lack of attention and awareness to even consider gender. So, transitioning to thinking about how this work impacts us in philanthropy. A gender lens approach to philanthropy is a growing area of focus for a lot of philanthropy is focused in really different areas, whether it's international development, whether it's human rights, whether it's place-based within the United States or within a certain geographic region, whether it's arts funding, cultural funding, direct services. It's a really wide swath. Gender lens philanthropy acknowledges that investing in women and girls advances everyone. So this is an area that I'm really excited Washington Women's Foundation is engaging in more deeply. They're in very good company to do so. There are other organizations out here who are also sort of arm in arm with all of you. And I want to ground this for us. So as we are thinking about how to apply a gender lens to this work, let's take the example of political leadership in Washington State. So I'm going to start with some data. Right now in Washington State, 8 out of 12 congressional seats, so 2 U.S. Senate seats, our 10 U.S. House seats, are held by women. Both of our senators are women. 6 members of the House are women. Currently, all are Democrats. 2 out of the 9 statewide executives are women. The 2 currently are insurance commissioner and auditor, both Democrats as well. 44.5% of state legislators, so people in the state house, people in the state house of representatives, are women. That's 66 total out of 147 seats, 45 of whom are state representatives, 21 are state senators, 42 of those are Democrats, 14 Republicans. So that is data. That is information that exists in the world. Those are all people who hold positions of power. Right now, a bunch of them are sitting in a room in Olympia, right? To apply a gender lens, we could ask, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of questions. 66 out of 147, 44.5% of state legislators. That's not 50. That's not 100. It has never been 100. So we can ask ourselves, what barriers exist that keep women from running for, winning, or holding statewide executive office, for instance? 2 out of 9 right now. What barriers exist? Counterwise, what policies, programs, or supports are in place that have helped women advance in congressional seats. Having a gender lens doesn't mean we're bummers all the time. It means we also get the opportunity to say, what are we doing really well? What's working for us? What is making equity real? What is helping advance this? We can also say, why is there a partisan difference in how women are advancing in political office? That again is data. That's not political, right? I'm not asking a partisan or an ideological question. I'm recognizing that right now there's a significant difference in how women are represented in the Democratic Party in the state legislature and in our state and in the Republican Party among electeds. Why? What's going into that? Why are those differences there? So those are some questions we could use to apply a gender lens in the realm of political leadership in Washington. You could also look at economic well-being. So some information about earning power. This is from Pew Research Center. This is census data from 2023 analyzed in a report in 2025. So Washington is somewhat surprisingly maybe among the bottom 10 states in gender pay equity. Gender pay equity is the difference between how much men are paid and how much women are paid in general. The median earnings for a typical working woman in Washington were $17,400 less than those of a typical working man in 2023. So if I'm in a household with a typical man, typical woman, the typical woman earns just over $17,000 less than the typical working man. And then Pew specifically calls out that women continue to be overrepresented in lower paying professions, and family caregiving responsibilities bring different pressure for working women and men. So how would we apply a gender lens here? We could ask, why are women, instead of saying, why are women paid less? We would say, why are men and women applying for, accepting, or being selected for different jobs in different sectors? What are the barriers? What are the pressures? What are the parameters that exist that are funneling men and women into jobs with different payments? Why are women overrepresented in lower paying professions? Why are men underrepresented in lower paying professions? What policies or shifts would equalize family caregiving responsibilities so pressure is dispersed more evenly or removed? My family's choice to have a family email address for our kids' preschool, that's us attempting to make a policy shift just for us, right? But what are the policy shifts that we could create overall so that these caregiving responsibilities aren't applied in this disproportionate and unequal manner? So, talked about gender and identity. We've talked about a gender lens, talked about it in the realm of philanthropy, and we've talked about what that could look like, shared some examples. I'm going to transition to talk about the state of women and girls in Washington. And spoiler alert, there's not an easy answer here, right? But we're at a moment where we have a choice. Do we want to make Washington a state where women and girls can thrive and succeed? I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we're all here because we believe firmly, yes, both yes, we will, and yes, we have to. So let's think about how women and girls are doing in Washington. This is me. This list represents me sitting down and thinking a little bit about all the various inputs that impact how women and girls are doing in Washington today. Again, by no means an exhaustive list. Economic well-being, healthcare, reproductive justice and bodily autonomy, workforce participation, return to office orders. We know that impacts men and women differently in many situations. Housing, affordability overall, community, safety, media and access to media, mental health care, climate, our changing climate, care in the care economy, not just child care, but elder care, other forms of care, and literally everything else. There is no issue out there that does not impact women and girls in Washington. There's also nothing out there that doesn't impact men and boys, right? But we're working within patriarchal structures, and so they've had a lot of advantages over a lot of centuries. So impacts are felt differently. We need to be realistic about that. So there are a lot of things that are influencing how women and girls are doing in Washington today. I did a really quick skim through the most recent headlines on the Seattle Times, and based on that, things are not looking great, I will say. So I just pulled out a couple things because I found this indicative. All of this is to say there is a lot going on. There's a lot going on in our state legislature. There's a lot going on in the federal government. There's a lot going on in things like women's hockey, which wasn't a thing I knew that I cared about until suddenly I cared deeply about how Hillary Knight, captain of Team USA, captain of our Seattle Torrent, is doing. I'm very invested. But the important thing there isn't that I care about sports, it's that Seattle has a women's professional hockey team. It's also about the massive discrepancy between how much those professional athletes are paid and respected and how much the men's US hockey team, those athletes are paid and respected. Which, by the way, they've won 3 gold medals. The women have won 3 gold medals. Women have won 3 medals since they started playing in the Olympics in 1998. So, way shorter time span than like 100 something years the men had to do the same thing. Neither here nor there. So, a lot of impacts, a lot of things that are going to impact how women and girls are doing. This is also to say, we can't just say women and girls are doing well or women and girls are doing poorly. It's too complicated, right? We can't extract. There are too many things. It's a beautiful tapestry. This also means we have the ability to make impact in lots of different ways. But two pieces of information, two pieces of data that I wanted to pull out. These were both done by a local polling firm called DHM. Their polling information is publicly available. I've included the link to it in our resources and to works cited here. But in polls done in the last year, I'm pulling two out. Washington's economic conditions overall. 40% of women said Washington's economic conditions are good overall. 66% of men said they're good. That is a wild difference. 60% of women said Washington's economic conditions are poor overall. Only 32% of men. So there's a wide range in how women think things are going and how men think things are going in terms of economic conditions. When we ask the question, is Washington headed in the right direction? There's also a difference. It's not as stark, but it's still significant. And I included this from 2 different dates because there are some interesting changes. In November of this past year, 30% of women said Washington is headed in the right direction. 39% is not a majority, right? 45% of men said that Washington was headed in the right direction. Also not a majority, but a larger share. In July, 34% of women thought Washington was going in the right direction. 34. That's a lot of women who think Washington's not going in the right direction. 51% of men thought Washington was going in the right direction. So again, there's a difference, right? We are having different experiences. We are viewing the world in different ways because the world views us in different ways. That's very, very clear, very related. But we're here today because we think Washington can do better. And this is a direct quote from Washington Women's Foundation. Through collective giving and collective action, we will. So, wanted to share a couple selected resources and some additional reading. I'm an avid reader. I included my Seattle Public Library book bingo card from last year on my little introductory slide. These are a few books that have influenced my thinking significantly over the last several years. I encourage folks who are interested to reach out or to take a look. There's no shortage of amazing academic research, cultural research, investigative research, and sort of anecdote and personal memoir about this work. I would point everyone especially to Family and Career, a book by Nobel Prize winning economist Claudia Goldin, who's a scholar who's been studying this work for decades and whose work is just being recognized internationally. Center for American Women in Politics is out of Rutgers University in New Jersey, but they have a fabulous data set on how women's representation is doing around the United States. They're great. Washington State Women's Commission, also great. They do a lot of work focused in Washington and are gubernatorial appointed and staffed through the governor's office. And the LGBT Foundation is a fabulous resource as well. And with that, I will conclude my portion of our time together. I'm going to stop sharing. I'd love to open it up to questions, but also want to be thoughtful of time. so that Aviva can take us through what this means for Washington Women's Foundation and our grant making criteria. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to be here today.
Do we have any questions for Dr. Scott right now, or shall we have Aviva dive in and then see where it goes from there? Seeing none, and remember, you can always ask them in a bit. Aviva, why don't you go ahead and pick it back up?
Sure. Thank you so much, Kiana. I am feeling so energized by what you all shared, and especially to be able to do something about it together, right? We are going to be leveraging the immense power that is Washington Women's Foundation to support women and girls, I'm excited. So as a collective, we're really going to be working together, and that gives me a lot of hope. One of the things that I know about this community and that we as a collective have learned over the years is the power of trying something new together. Core to our values as a learning community is a true commitment to embracing discomfort and supporting each other through new things. And in our community, we know we have a wide range of experiences in applying a gender lens. We also have the power of lived experience as a group of women. So we know that we'll learn a ton this year, and we're going to be doing it together. So a little bit about how we think about gender. So we were working on new criteria for grant making this year. And one of the things we were wrestling with was a definition of women and girls. We had one in the past that we used for the women and girls grants, and it was working, but it was starting to feel outdated already. And the truth is, as Dr. Scott just outlined, our society's understanding of gender is evolving rapidly. And we as a foundation want to be responsive to that change. So instead of a rigid definition, this is how we define women and girls, we are committing to having a broad and evolving understanding of gender. So what does that mean for us? It means that we know and acknowledge that all people are impacted by sexism. From our work around race and gender equity focused learning over the past several years, we also know that inequity is not experienced by all women in the same way. Dr. Scott talked about intersectionality. We know women of color experience that intersectional nature of race and gender in compounding ways. We also know that trans women experience discrimination and harassment based on their gender identity, in addition to any other identities they may hold. So for that reason, with our grants, we are intentionally supporting women, girls, and gender expansive people, including very explicitly cis, trans, and non-binary individuals and communities. And we feel it's important to be explicit about that inclusion of the trans community so that the nonprofits who are trying to figure out if they're a good fit for us or not, they know, yes, come on in. We want to learn about you. We want to fund you. We want to be in partnership with you. Within our membership, we know, of course, that there will be members who are familiar with this language. Everything that was shared is comfortable and easy breezy, let's go. And some might feel more intimidated by it. It might be new terms, a new way to apply it. And we just want to assure you, just take a moment to assure you that we are in this together, and we will continue to provide many resources and peer learning opportunities as we learn together this year and beyond. And we welcome your questions, your curiosities, and I encourage you to really lean on each other and on our community norms about how we engage together. And we're looking forward to wrestling through this together this year. Okay, so now to the question of how we will operationalize the gender lens. I want to spend some time briefly talking about the grant criteria, and then I'm going to run through the rubric itself. So this is our criteria we'll use to assess fit for all of our grants. And it's really built on what we've learned over the past several years when it comes to increasing equity and reducing disparities in Washington State, our old criteria. So our grants, as you know, are now focused on women and girls most impacted by inequity. As a learning organization, this means that we're going to build on that understanding of race even as we apply that targeted gender lens to our grant making. We also talk a little bit in our criteria language about targeted universalism. It shapes our understanding of how to address that intersectional nature of inequities in our state. In simple terms, targeted universalism means setting universal goals that can be achieved through targeted approaches. So for us, our universal goal is equity for all in Washington state, and we believe that goal is best achieved by supporting the women and girls most impacted by inequity. And there'll be more opportunities to learn about this framework in the year ahead, but I just wanted to ground us in that universal goal. Okay, to the criteria itself. We seek to support and collectively invest in organizations and social change efforts that are intentional in their work to improve the lives of women and girls most impacted by inequities, accountable to the communities they serve, and demonstrate their ability to achieve long-term goals of increasing equity and reducing disparities. So what do we mean by those three things? Intentional, accountable, demonstrable. Intentional, we're really looking for organizations that are explicitly focused on providing services to or advocating for women and girls most impacted by inequities. That intentionality is key, and I feel like we have found through many years of applying the previous criteria that you can start to really understand an organization if you get at their intention. Accountability is something that has been really powerful to understand in application, both in the many ways organizations are accountable to the communities they serve and in how it shows up and how they write about their work, right? So we want to be flexible about what it will look like and have come to understand that accountability can look like leadership, where women and girls are visibly leading or developing leadership of women and girls. It can look like co-creation, so that active engagement in ongoing and shared decision-making, planning, and assessment, and connection. So really drawing on the strengths, assets, and lived experience of women and girls. And lastly, demonstrable. Can an organization demonstrate how their work reduces disparities and or achieves more equitable outcomes for women and girls most impacted by inequities in Washington state? Do they know that their work is doing what they're trying to do, right? That's what we're trying to assess here. So intentional, accountable, demonstrable. Okay, before we get to questions, I want to briefly look at our new rubric together. The rubric has 3 questions that connect directly to the 3 elements of the criteria: intentional, accountable, demonstrable. And we have designed this rubric with 2 goals. The first is for you all, our lovely members. We want to make it easy and simple for members to use this rubric in a way that makes grant decisions more streamlined and helps us have a quicker turnaround time on our grant making while maintaining that rigorous evaluation we are known for. And secondly, we're hoping that by using this rubric, we'll be able to provide helpful feedback for grant applicants as they're trying to figure out, hey, do I fit this criteria or not? So you'll see on the next 3 slides the rubric for the 3 elements of the criteria. For this first one, we're in assessing an organization's intentionality on a scale of 1 to 4. Assess an organization's intentional focus on providing services to or advocating for women and girls most impacted by inequities. I'm going to just move quickly through these because I want to get to your questions, so put them in the chat. Next is accountability, so trying to understand an organization's accountability to women and girls most impacted by inequities. So an organization that shows strong accountability with multiple examples all the way down to number 1, an organization that by using the information we have, it does not seem like it is accountable to women and girls. And then lastly, demonstrable. So on a scale of 1 to 4, assessing an organization's knowledge of their impact in achieving those equitable outcomes. So those strong examples versus some impact versus all the way to they are not able to demonstrate their impact. Okay, I know that was fast and we already had a lot of information from Dr. Scott, but I want to make sure we have time for your questions, and we only have an hour, so I'll stop there and look forward to doing this work together with you. And feel free to put stuff in the chat. We can take a look at the chat, and then also come off mute and share your questions that way if you'd like. Okay, let me see if there's anything in here. Okay, Heidi, thank you. Can a group be exceptional if it only serves white women, girls? Is some intersectionality required? That's an excellent question, Heidi. I think it goes to the core piece of the criteria around women and girls most impacted by inequity. And not to say that white women aren't impacted by inequity, absolutely they are. But we are looking for women and girls that are, as Maria's been using this term I really like, around furthest from justice, right? So in our assessment, we are looking for organizations that are targeting women and girls in a really intentional way. Whatever program or advocacy work they are doing on behalf of them is intentional around women and girls who are furthest from justice. So I would say, to answer your question more succinctly, yes, some intersectionality is required. And I welcome anyone else, not just staff or Kiana, but anyone else who wants to chime in on that, because I think it's a really great question.
I just want to comment. I think this question and the criteria will be really interesting in the first round of grants because I'm curious to look at like the landscape of Washington and the applicants to see like how gender projects talk about this furthest from justice in their own language because I think a lot of us might be used to just focusing on women and girls. So I think that this will be a really nice I think it'll be really interesting to pilot and work through and see how. So I'm just reflecting. I'm excited to get started with this criteria and see how it looks. I don't know if you guys have already looked at some applications and seen how it goes, but will there be training for the grantees to know how to position themselves to be a candidate for this, or will they be ready to be a candidate for this? If that kind of makes sense. So I'm just expressing some interest and excitement around that.
Thank you, Erin. And that means a lot knowing your knowledge and expertise around this work. Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of thinking of how we can support organizations that are applying to know how they can better explain their work, right? If they submit and it seems like it's not a good fit, and we come back to them and they say, "Hey, I really thought we were a good fit," then that's a good conversation to be able to say, "Well, this is what we heard," and that's part of what we're hoping the criteria will help us with. Marilyn, thank you for the question in the chat. What about intersectionality, about disability, in addition to women and girls? Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing that lens in. When we think about women who are furthest from justice, disabled women are definitely experience inequity in a deep way. And so absolutely, I think, intersectionality, I loved the graphic that we saw earlier, there's so many different lenses and ways it can show up. So absolutely, I would think about women who experience that intersectionality with disability as well. And I would be so curious if there's an organization doing that work here in Washington. I hope they apply.
I was really curious, Kiana, one of the books you recommended was about like a mother who is disabled. I just was like, then reading this disability. I also have a mother who's visually impaired, so I was like, disability goes hand in hand and there's no race quantifier here, but I might pick your brain. I've never read that book, but when I saw it, I was really curious.
I was just putting it in the chat as a recommendation again, because that was a book that I read at the recommendation of someone last year and fundamentally changed how I view parts of the world that I just took for granted, and the intersection of parental status and gender and sex and ability is particularly fascinating. The author is deeply, deeply generous in sharing her own experience navigating the complexity of holding all of those things at once and of trying to participate in structures that make it almost impossible for her to participate. She's also a foster mother, which is a fascinating additional piece to this. It's a fantastic book. Couldn't recommend it enough. It's called Unfit Parent by Jessica Slice, I want to say. It's on that slide, which we'll send out.
Thank you. Yeah, I see a comment from Barbara here, but Marilyn, did you want to continue this piece of the conversation?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the whole thing about intersectionality is that it includes pieces that we may not even think about. So what about women who are incarcerated?
Mm-hmm.
What about women who are homeless? And probably more of those are not white than white, but you know, it's there's definitely a lot of ways you can, a class, of course. There's a lot of ways you can look at it. We're not looking at middle class white women who are idealized to gender norms. That's not what those are not the people we're really concerned with. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. Yeah. We are sort of deepening our commitment. That's how I've been thinking about it. We have developed as a collective a strong racial equity lens, I believe, in the last several years. You all, I've seen you in grant committee meetings. You're very comfortable talking about race in a way that we weren't, 5 years ago. And that's been huge growth for us. And now it's time to push us even further, right? And to go even deeper. Yeah. Some great comments here in the chat, and I see Stacy's hand. Do you have a question, Stacy? Go for it.
Well, I'm wondering about the intentional, the focused part in the past. I haven't reviewed recently, but when I have in the past, it was a real question like, is this a program that they have that serves women and girls, or is this what they do? Is it in their mission statement? Have we made
Mhm.
that clear on our website? Or have we made it clear within ourselves?
Yeah, thank you, Stacy. Um, and this is a key question I knew would come up for nonprofits as they're thinking about applying. So we did include it as an FAQ, and I stressed it in the info sessions we did for nonprofits. But that's it's a complicated thing, right? As you know, working in nonprofits, Stacy. Um, we are still doing general operating grants, right? That is a core commitment of ours. We've heard great feedback around structuring our grants that way from nonprofits. So we're not getting rid of that. And what that means is that we are looking at the organization as a whole. So we're looking for organizations that have that intentionality and don't want to be too prescriptive about what that could look like in practice. It might be an organization that's all they do, right? They are solely focused on women and girls, whether with all those lenses that we just talked about, all those intersectionalities and ways that women experience discrimination. And that's the core of what they do. It could be, I guess, that they have a strong program that supports women and girls. Um, I think there is a prioritization that we will probably uncover as grant committees go through the evaluation work, right? If we are really trying to apply that, maybe we should put that criteria back up on the slide if that's possible, Catherine. Sorry, I know you're doing other things. Um, checking everybody in. But if just to bring that language back, we're asking for organizations that are explicitly focused on providing service to or advocating for women and girls most impacted by inequities. So do they have that explicit focus built in to their organization as a whole, even if part of their work is supporting other folks with other identities? Maybe yes, maybe no. We also know that geography plays a role, right? So there might be an organization in a rural community in Washington where they have to do everything because they are the only organization, right? And so we don't want to ding them on not being solely focused on women and girls because they are being responsive to their community needs and there's no one else to do the work, right? So we don't want to be too prescriptive about what it looks like to be intentionally focused on providing service to or advocating for women and girls most impacted by inequities. But we also want to be as clear as possible, even as we're trying something new, so that folks can, sort of filter themselves out. I'm wondering, I know Gwen is here, my lovely grants chair, if not to tap you without telling you, but if you wanted to chime in on this, I think it would be helpful, especially since you were in those info sessions with me.
I mean, I think overall, the organizations that did speak up were just quite excited about the changes, and they were quite excited about the amount of sort of facilitation and help that the staff were able to do. That Aviva was very open to say, please reach out as you're filling in the application or if you have questions. And I think for us as committees, for the various grant projects, it's just going to be, I think it'll be really useful to have the rubric to sort of evaluate, but it is also going to be important for us to sort of stay true to that, to the questions and how we feel it fits in that, um, and not and not sort of be like, oh, well, we like this one, so we'll give it a 4, as opposed to this makes sense to rate it a 4 based on what we've asked the organizations to answer in those specific questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Gwen. Okay, and being mindful of the time here, I want to say that if you see this criteria and you are excited to try applying it, many of you are signed up for grant committees already. If you're not yet and you're curious, reach out anytime or sign up. We're ready to apply this with you. And like everything we do, we will evolve and adapt as we go, as we see maybe we need to get even more explicit. No, you have to be solely focused, or no, it has to look like this, or like that's what we're going to do together. And we really do mean together. So if you want to sign up. And then Catherine wanted me to remember to remind you all about the community celebration next week at the Georgetown Ballroom. All are invited, and we hope you can join us. Thank you for putting the link in the chat, Catherine. Okay, we have 1 minute left. If there's a burning question, maybe something for, yeah, sorry, Catherine.
Yeah, Viva or Maria, do you want to address Heidi's
Oh, thank you.
question in the chat? I'm remembering something about this, but I don't remember the answer.
This isn't exactly your question, Heidi, but we are doing some outreach to try to get more organizations that do this work to apply. And if you know organizations, we encourage you to help them. Maria, did you think of what you
Yeah,
want to-
Aviva, I think what Heidi's referencing is the work that Magic Cabinet is helping us with in identifying. Yeah, yeah. that work.
Excellent. So yes, we are working on it for sure.
Yeah, and big thank you to Dr. Scott and Aviva for leading us through this session today. This has been recorded, so we will share it out with everyone and with our community. So hope to see everyone next week, like Aviva mentioned, at the community celebration. And have a wonderful day. We're glad to see you.